Yeah. It's okay, right? Why? What's happening?
No, just asking.
I don't think I'm going to be able to make the 4 o'clock practice today or tomorrow. I'm sorry to say.
Sorry to hear.
I won't get still part of the reason why I'm not.
All right.
You mean you're going swimming? Yeah, no. PTP and Maju seconded them.
Enlisted them.
Enlisted them to come and help me do some heavy lifting. So he's not part of it. You made that arrangement? Yes, I did. Well, I've been trying to organise this for a couple of weeks now. It's just ridiculous to try and get somebody up there to help me to do some, some able-bodied people. So I came up with this idea of organising.
What makes you think that I'm able-bodied?
Well, you're able-bodied.
I have.
You can swim pretty good. You drive a car.
I have an ingrowing toenail.
A basin.
I have obeisance.
Yes. Don't do obeisance.
That should be a valid reason. All right, let's start with the praise to Manjushri.
Obeisance to my guru, protect my Manjushri, scriptural text, symbolic of things and statements. This understanding shone forth as a sun unclouded by defilements or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways for the patient life of the Father to his son. His creatures caught in the prison of the sun's light, confusing the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You, who is reigning in the hunger of the nation of the Dharma, arouse us from the stupor of delusions and frees us from the iron chains of outcome. Whose powerful sword of wisdom shews to the suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. I entreat you, O Manjushri, whose princely bodies adorned with 112 marks of Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfection of Bodhisattva, being pure from beginning. O Manjushri, all loving one, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminated the darkness and closing my mind, inviting my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Chodan Tsoge Chonama Chancho Badu Dani Kyasuchi Dagi Chenyendi Pletsonangi Jola Penche Sange Dokasho Chodan Tsoge Chonama Chancho Badu Dani Kyasuchi Dagi Chenyendi Pletsonangi Jola Penche Sange Dokasho Sange Chodan Tsoge Chonama Chancho Badu Dani Kyasuchi
All right, good afternoon. How's everyone? I know, it sounds a bit intimidating. All right, so all right, field of excellence, 3 jewels, field of benefits, parents, field of suffering, travelers, the sick, and the destitute.
Remember, I asked you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So where do you get the field of suffering, travelers, the sick, and the destitute?
I found it in the mentorship speech.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to continue with looking at the 18 root downfalls. Then we're going to look at Shantideva's text. Have you got any questions to begin with? Any questions arising from Geshe-la's sessions, from the review sessions, from life in general, midlife crisis, etc.? All right. So let's look at some more root downfalls. Where is that? Where is that? Where is that? It's probably here. Okay. So I think that in the previous week, we looked at the 12th root downfall, which is causing others to turn away from the supreme enlightenment, or convincing others to, discouraging others from full enlightenment. That's the last thing that we've covered. Let's look at the 13th root downfall, which is causing others to abandon the vows of the individual liberation. So it's basically about being partial with respect to the Hinayana. When you cause someone who abides correctly in the ethics of individual liberation to turn away from those ethics by saying, what's the use of the ethical? Actually, we've covered that.
We did the paradox for the causing right?
Yeah, so we did that, right? We did that, sorry. Let's roll on to the next one, which is holding that attachment in the like cannot be abandoned by the learner's vehicle. That's what I meant by saying being partial with respect to the Hinayana. So if you denigrate the hearer as a solid to realize his vehicle, saying, regardless of how much you train in it, you will not be able to abandon all disturbing emotions without exception, and hold that the realizations of hearers and solid to realizers do not free them from cyclic existence. It is a root downfall of holding that attachment and the like cannot be abandoned by the learner's vehicle. So I think that this is pretty straightforward, pretty simple to understand. So if you have a biased or partial attitude with respect to the Hinayanist and say that they cannot abandon afflictions, they cannot abandon anger, attachment, and so forth. So what's the use, for example, of practicing that? This is the type of attitude that is promoted here. So remembering that whatever we practice in the Mahayana, it is done on the basis of practicing the Hinayana, right? So we practice the Hinayana, but we add to that a few more things, or we tweak some of the attitudes that we have, but it's not that we make this categorical differentiation between Hinayana and Mahayana. The Hinayana we do not practice, whereas we practice the Mahayana, right? So we don't view it like that. It's actually quite a, I think, in some sense, a clear and simple distinction that we make. And I think that probably most of us are on the same page with respect to it. But then interestingly, kind of for some reason, or in one way that is a bit obscure to me, I ended up being part of a Buddhist discussion group in Hebrew in Israel. Probably someone just put my name on the list. And so people put different random questions and random statements. And sometimes people do come up with this really divisive attitude. I think that it's mainly people that practice, at least kind of in that Israeli discussion group, it's many people I think that do practice Hinayana. And I think that they have the idea that we look down on them, or that we criticize them or whatever. I think that I've never had a comment from one of my close friends that disparages them, but I think that from the other side, there might be this impression that we do. I mean, if they have that impression, it's probably not unfounded. Probably there is a reason for that in one statement or another. Sometimes I think that it's about translation. So of course I'm part of it, but sometimes I think that when you look at English translation that is done from the Indian language or from the Tibetan language, and then doing them into making them available into other languages, it's easy to not be precise enough. Like, for example, I can just give you one example. There is a word in Tibetan, randun, which means pursuing your own welfare. it's easy to take that word and say that you're self-centered, or kind of, it is also used in that way in Tibetan language. If you want to say that someone is kind of really self-centered, you say that they are random, they are emphasize their own welfare.
So a bit of pride or arrogance?
No, just on welfare. Just kind of what you're concerned with is your own welfare. So then, but then if you then look at the distinction between the Hinayana and Mahayana, then in Tibetan language, they say that Mahayana are working are working in order to accomplish their own welfare. So they use this word randun, which can in another context be translated as being selfish, pursuing your own welfare, being self-interested, being self-centered, and so forth. So I think that sometimes this impression of kind of making that distinction, being biased, looking down on the Hinayana, it's because of the translation rather than the actual sentiment that you find in the Mahayana tradition. Yeah.
I just noted that out of the 18 downfalls, it's mentioned twice pretty much about disparaging Hinayana. So somewhere historically, that's obviously been the case.
Yeah.
That to me, that's the way I see it. But obviously, it has come across that way. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there twice in the downfalls.
But I guess Zopa, it wasn't until Geshe Zopa gave a teaching about this just a few years ago here at Chen Raisik, and it really changed my whole attitude, because I think it can, because we are, our motivation is to benefit all sentient beings, it's the biggest motivation, and it's something that distinguishes us from the Hinayana. So, it's not too hard to think of. I'm a bit, my motivation is bigger than theirs, and I don't think that's an unrealistic motivation even to take. But I think it is an inappropriate one to take. I mean, it might be used, but it's inappropriate to take it because, it is upon the Hinayana path that we are dependent on for our Mahayana path. Without the Hinayana path, there would be no Mahayana path. And Geshe Zopa really pushed that point home, just the interdependence of us with the Hinayana path. And that really got rid of any arrogance that I was harboring.
I mean, I think that sometimes also, just to continue with kind of this point, the word for, when you look at the wordings themselves, Mahayana and Hinayana is the small vehicle, Mahayana is the great vehicle. So the language itself implies something small and something great, and it does push some buttons. When Tibetans explain that, which means that this wrong connotation is also implied in the Tibetan language, is that it's not that small means that they're not as valuable or less significant. It has to do with the scope of one's mind, the vastness of one's mind. So you have a mind that is more focused on your own welfare, and a mind that is more focused on the welfare of others. But in no way kind of we disparage one, and have a sense of CSF as being elevated or higher than others. Yeah, these problems exist in the terms, but I think that there is explanation that comes with that. Chukila?
I just want to say a couple of things. One was that we're reminded that a Hinayana practitioner doesn't call themselves a Hinayana practitioner. That as soon as they hear that, they know, that's a Mahayanist calling us low scope practitioner. So that's something to keep in mind. But also with the translation, when they say for those lower capable beings. And so we have in English quite laden language around capability. So it sounds like you're not as intelligent or something like that in terms of how we perceive that when it's translated like that. So I think the language, rather than saying lower scope, the more medium scope or great scope of saying lesser capable beings.
And there's also, by the way, there's also a difference between Hinayana and Theravada. So Theravada is one part of the Hinayana. It's like, I think that Theravada is what you find now in Sri Lanka and so forth, but there were also other Hinayana traditions.
Yeah. Theravada is the one that has survived.
But I wonder if like what you have in Laos, Cambodia and so forth, is it also Theravada or is it Hinayana? All right, so they're exactly like Sri Lanka?
Who say that they're not Theravada, that they're something about from the original Buddha, or I can't remember the name.
Yeah, because I was also under the impression that those that are non-Hinayanis, which are non-Theravadist traditions, which are still active.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, that we don't usually say small vehicle, great vehicle. We say lesser vehicle and great vehicle, so that they could get the wrong impression. No, it's like the lesser vehicle. Because that is quite low to.
Well, I think that kind of both in Tibetan, I think that in Tibetan, in Sanskrit, and in English, the word small or lesser is there. You cannot avoid it. It's like the elephant in the room. You know, you might try to express it in different ways, but at the end of the day, the language itself speaks about small and big, lesser and bigger. So the way to work around it is to look at the meaning of the word rather than to say that.
Or you could go, Hinayana could be the great, and the Mahayana could be the greater. So
yeah, but that would be a wrong translation.
Yeah. One way I find useful is I think about it like a camera lens, and that it's just a matter of opening the scope of the camera, so that it's not about a hierarchy. It's that you've got more focusing and widening the scope.
Yeah, I think that this is the way that they explain it in, that the Tibetan teachers explain that. They said it has to do with how vast or extensive your mind is. Yeah. Madhu? Mr. Madhu, sorry.
So this is interesting. Yeah, like I've been trying to understand how Buddhism started and like how the school started and where did these teachings come from and when did Mahayana and everything come from. Like looks like the more I read, it's like these words Hinayana, Mahayana came only after Buddha died, and these schools are different schools within Hinayana and Theravada and other ones. And I feel that there is no difference between Hinayana and Mahayana. And I was reading actually one of the Pali suttas, and it was clearly said, like one of the students asked Buddha, like, why are you going to these lonely places? Don't you feel alone and scared to just go and meditate alone? And he said, like, for the benefit of all mother beings, I'm doing that. So it's just like, fundamentally, it's there in even in Hinayana thing. So it's just looks like we came up with these categories and things like after Buddha, but all these teachings are there in both of them.
Well, I think that the Pali Sutras, the Hinayana Sutras, would be accepted by the Mahayanis, so they are part of the Mahayana canon, let's say. But there's also the things that belong only to the Mahayana canon that the Hinayanis would not accept as teachings of the Buddha. So I think that when you read sutras from the Pali tradition, they would also be accepted by the Mahayana, and also the Hinayanis themselves will accept that that the Buddha, for example, went off to an isolated place to meditate on the welfare of all sentient beings. They would agree with that, but they would say that, but the Buddha did not teach for us the way to do exactly the same thing. He just taught us the way to attain liberation. Anyway, so there's, I think that in general, this root downfall is quite, I think, clear. And in our discussion, I think that we highlighted probably a few, I think that it probably reinforces the necessity to be skillful about the way that we express ourselves when we have conversations with others, and make sure that what we say is understood by others. So if you denigrate the hearer, so sorry to realize this vehicle, saying regardless of how much you train in it, you will not be able to abandon all the stemming emotions without exception, and hold that the realizations of hearers and sorry to realizers do not free them from cyclic existence. It is a root downfall of holding that attachment in the light cannot be abandoned by the learner's vehicle, which is, by the way, it is something that you could come up with if you have a partial understanding of the philosophical views that some hearers and sort of realizes tenet holders view. When you look at the philosophical system, the system of tenets, there are Hinayana tenets and Mahayana tenets. So indeed, from the viewpoint of the consequent school of thought, if you hold the Hinayana tenet, Hinayana school of thought, you cannot abandon attachment or anger. But you can be a Hinayanist with a middle way consequence school with a Mahayana philosophical view. So from the point of view of your practice, you will not be aiming at becoming Buddha. You just want to be liberated. You think that for you, this is realistic. And this is great. It's not that there's a fault in wanting to be liberated. Of course, it is totally logical to be liberated. But your philosophical view would still be a Mahayana philosophical view, which is emptiness of inherent existence. No, that would be a philosophical view. So not understanding that distinction, you might think that if you're Hinayanist, necessarily your philosophical view is incorrect, and therefore you'll not be able to eliminate ignorance, anger, attachment, and so forth. So that's this root downfall. Then after that, in the text, there is something interesting. There is a note. It says, if while reciting, reading, and teaching the Mahayana text, you claim out of attachment to material gain and honor that I am a practitioner of the Mahayana unconcerned with gain and honor, but others are not. You're praising yourself and belittling others, and thus it is a root downfall of belittling others with deceptive words. This is not counted as a separate downfall since it is included within the first root downfall of praising oneself and belittling others. It seems that kind of dislocation of this paragraph is a bit awkward. You know, it says that actually going back to the first root downfall, I have a note to make. I think that the reason that it is like that, stated like that, is when we think of the original text, Tibetan texts were carved on wooden blocks. It might have been the case that the author of this text have composed the commentary. It was already set in wooden blocks. It was already set in carving. And then he thought to himself, actually, I have a point to add. So he added it in this point. This is just a theory. I'm not sure that this is correct, but I think that the original text was less amenable to cut and paste. So, I mean, it's also, I guess that it's also, maybe it's slightly or remotely related to the 14th root downfall, but it is still affiliated with the first one. If you say that, you know, I'm such a great Mahayana practitioner, but I'm such a great practitioner of the Mahayana, but others are not, surreptitiously or indirectly, you disparage others, praising yourself and belittling others. All right, so let's suffice with that for today, with the advice of the Bodhisattva vow, and then go back to the text. Any questions from the people at home, by the way? All right. Well, Chris Gwynn always has questions, and today is silent. I wonder if he's all right. So I hope that you're right, Chris. So
he's a slow, I think.
You're okay. That's very good. Thank you. All right. What I wanted to do today then with the text is to look at the third power in this presentation, which is the power of thorough application of the antidote, and then maybe to look at the next one that we've started, the power of turning away from negativity. So let's look at the outline. We've covered the first power, an extensive explanation of the first power, the power of regret. Then the second power, the power of support. I think that today we've completed looking at the third power, the power of applying the antidote at all times. And we've studied the power of turning away from wrongdoing. So to begin with, when you think of applying the power of the antidote at all times, the power of thorough application of the antidote, what is the immediate thing that comes to your mind? What do you need to do when you enact the third power? I mean, what kind of things, not just one thing, but what kind of things do you do when you apply thorough application of the antidote? Contemplate karma. Yes.
You resolve. So resolve not to do the thing for a certain period of time.
Resolve not to do the things for a certain period of time. I think that this is coming from the power of turning away from faults. So that resolve is in the fourth power.
Oh, okay. Oh, well then the remedy. So
the remedy. Yeah.
Mantra, Bodhisattva, or go and do something good for a Dharma center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or
singing
anything.
praises, telling how great I'm doing.
That's it. Say, Yaki, keep going with a sense of humor. It's working.
Yeah. Thank you. Also, Olaf is saying meditation on emptiness. Yeah, that's also correct. So we have mantra recitation, meditation on emptiness, tricky. Maggie, sorry. Meditation on death and impermanence. Meditation on bodhicitta. Jenny is saying, I'm wondering about skillful means. We're referring often to Buddha or Bodhisattvas applying skillful means to help sentient beings along the path of enlightenment. How would we, as baby Bodhisattvas, apply skillful means? So I think that that's probably, is that related to the third power, or is it a general question? So I think it's a general question, Jen. I'll maybe try to look at it in a few minutes. So altogether, I think that what most of you said, if not all of you, are things that we do with the power of thorough application of the antidote. So within that, we have different things that we do. We recite mantras. Mainly, I think that the most famous one is the Vajrasattva mantra, but we also do 35 Buddhas. So we offer prostrations to the 35 Buddhas. We meditate on emptiness and bodhicitta, death and impermanence, karma, and so forth. All of this is normally counted as power of thorough application of the antidote. So Jen is saying, general question, just could not type it fast enough when you asked about anyone having questions. All right, Jen, so I'll try to look at your questions in a few minutes. So this is what so all those different practices are normally slotted in within the power of thorough application of the antidote. A common Tibetan teacher would say things like, you do prostrations, circumambulations, offerings, and so forth. It's more like Tibetan language often works with formula. You learn one thing and then you repeat it again and again. So those are the things that you repeat when you speak of the power of thorough application of the antidote. Interestingly, Shantideva doesn't mention that. He does something else completely with the power of thorough application of the antidote. So then I thought of here, let's try to look at what Shantideva says with respect to power of thorough application of the antidote and what we are used to with a thorough application of the antidote. Now, how can we marry between these two things? So let's look at the outline. So with the third power, the power of applying the antidote at all times, so thorough application of the antidote, it first of all speaks of the reason it is reasonable, the reasons it is reasonable to make effort in purifying negativities, and then the reasonableness of making effort quickly. So it says that first of all, you need to make effort to purify negativities and you need to do it quickly, to cut it short. We need to do it quickly. I think that it's easy to think about it. We need to do it quickly because we are certain that we die. We are not certain about the time of death. So we want to die before.
And also that karma multiplies.
And also karma multiplies, yeah. So as there is absolutely no reason not to fear suffering, being lazy about cultivating the path is unreasonable. So then when looking at the reasons it is reasonable to make effort in purifying negativities, it says the need to purify negativities the need to quickly purify negativities is illustrated by the analogy of disease. So it says in verse 54, if I need to comply with the doctor's advice when frightened by an ordinary illness, then what need to mention that it is so when perpetually diseased by the hundreds of faults of attachment and so forth. So when we are perpetually diseased by the 100 faults of attachment and so forth, we take that, we look at an extreme situation by which through anger, attachment, and so forth, we end up in a miserable state of existence. Right? We fall to the miserable realms because of those afflictive states of mind. The suffering said to be tremendous. So if we go through painful treatment with an ordinary illness, and the commentary sometimes speaks about bloodletting and burning and acupuncture and so forth, all those painful procedures that you undergo when you go to see not only a Tibetan doctor or a Chinese doctor, but also when you go to hospital here where they cut you, stick needles in you, and yeah, when they, how do you call it? When they take a swab, yeah. There was, I think that a while back, kind of I had a day where I was feeling a bit kind of, I don't know, weird, but I didn't want to go and see a doctor because this swab thing just sounded horrible. Anyway.
Set it out for a few days.
Sorry?
Set it out for a few days.
Yeah, well, just for one day, just because it sounded like horrible. Anyway, so, anyway, it says, stating the meaning of analogy, then there are great disadvantages to the disease of the three poisons, in addition to the medicine for destroying them is rare. So it says in verse 55, if all the people dwelling in Jambudvipa, which means this continent or this world, can be crushed just, by just one of these, and if no other medicine to cure them is to be found in all directions, it is connected with the next verse, 56, that comes under the heading of, thus it is reasonable to practice in accord with the words of the teacher, the supreme doctor, then the intention not to act in accordance with the words that can uproot every misery of the all-knowing physician is extremely bewildered and an object of scorn. So it seems that what Shantideva says here in general is that we as sentient beings can be crushed just by one of those illnesses that we have. We can be crushed by anger, by attachment, and so forth. I think that there are two ways of explaining that. One of them is that when you look at weapons of mass destruction, with anger, you can lay waste to the whole planet and thereby eliminate everyone. But I think that thinking of the way that Shantideva and other commentaries have explained that, I think that it's before the era of weapons of mass destruction. It seems that what can destroy all of us is our own anger, attachment, and so forth, from the viewpoint of they're taking us to miserable states of existence. We're being completely crushed by the suffering of miserable states of existence because of our own afflictive states of mind. Because of anger, we end up in those states. Because of attachment, we end up in those states. Each one of them alone can cause those states to come about. So, as it says, where is it? Lost the plot. Then the intention not to act in accordance with the words that can uproot every misery. Sorry, if all the people dwelling in Jambudvipa can be crushed just by one of these afflictive states of mind, and if no other medicine to cure them is to be found in all directions, then the intention not to act in accordance with the words that can uproot every misery of the all-knowing physician is extremely bewildering and an object of scorn. So altogether here, sorry, I pressed the wrong thing. All right. So it says that we need to act quickly. To quickly purify negativities is illustrated by the analogy of disease. Then showing the need to purify by means of an analogy of an abyss, which I think is where we start off with today. So it says in verse 57, if I need to be conscientious near a small ordinary precipice, then how much more so near the precipice of long durations that drop for thousands of yojanas. Sorry? Yeah, yojanas is the Indian term and bhaktas is the Tibetan term. I think I can't remember how many miles is it, but there is like sorry? Yeah, no, let's see.
How much is it?
I think it's something I read somewhere that where like a bullock cart can travel in a day or something. Can travel in a day. I might be wrong.
Something like that.
Just a little.
Anyway, I'll look for it later. No. All right, so we have another analogy with the abyss, encouraging us to purify negative actions done before. Then, again, looking at the outline. The reasonable of making effort quickly in verse 58. It is inappropriate to stay happily thinking, today alone I shall not die, for inevitably the time will come when I shall go out of existence. And the next verse says, as there is absolutely no reason to fear suffering, being lazy about cultivating the path is unreasonable. Who will grant me fearlessness in verse 59? How can I be surely freed from this? If I shall inevitably go out of existence, how can I remain in mental happiness? So this is what Shantideva says with respect to the power of thorough application of the antidote. He says that we need to do something about our situation because it's grim. If we're not going to do something about our situation, we're going to be crushed by miserable states of existence. Not only that, we also need to do it quickly. Now, before we fall to that abyss of miserable states of existence, that would be so difficult to make a way out from that great abyss. And there's absolutely no reason not to fear that state of existence. So it seems that the way that Shantideva is dealing with that here is encouraging us to do something about negativities that we have done before. So what do we do about negativities that we've done before? We purify them. We apply antidote to them. And this is what, in some sense, I wouldn't say that he misses out or that he forgets to tell us, but it implies in his commentary that once we understand the gravity of a situation, then we do something to rectify it, to remedy it. So I want to then look at the other commentary, at the essence of Manjushu's speech by Khenpo Kunpen. And it says in section 289. All right. The power of applied antidote. It says, third, the power of the applied antidote. Though this power mainly concerns what is taught in the chapters on heedfulness, or conscientiousness, introspection, which is the alertness, which means chapter 4, 5, and patience, chapter number 6. And the development of these topics here in the stanzas, the power of applied antidote, concerns developing an attitude in one's mind that purifies one's negative deeds. Right? So here it says that the power of antidote, it is developing an antidote in your mind that purifies negative actions. To summarize it, developing an antidote. Then it says, for this one must repeatedly contemplate on karma, the law of cause and effect, and on impermanence. And it seems that this is also what Shantideva emphasizes in those verses that we've just looked at. It speaks about how we've done actions, negative actions before. We are bound to go into miserable states of existence, being under the influence of anger, attachment, and so forth. We should be quick about this purification because there is great suffering that is awaiting us. But we'd be crazy not to fear that. So we need to repeat that, to repeatedly contemplate karma and impermanence. This is to say, all who lack the mindset of developing an antidote to purify the negative deeds in their minds need to develop such a mindset, right? So we need to develop the mindset of developing an antidote. And those who might even have this mindset to purify the negative deeds to some extent, but who do not apply the antidote due to laziness and distraction, must swiftly apply it. For this purpose, they should contemplate again and again on karma, the law of cause and effect, and on impermanence. So it seems that in this paragraph 289, Khenpo Kumpas gives the rationale behind Shantideva's presentation. It says that you might have not contemplated karma. You might not have realized what's awaiting for you. You might have done that half-heartedly, which I think that this is what happens to us a lot. No, at least to me, kind of I contemplate karma half-heartedly or partially. I'm not totally scared of what's awaiting for me in my next lifetime. I mean, sometimes I am, but I guess that most of the time I can say that most of the time I'm not terrified. So it is due to not considering karma seriously enough, or even to some degree, I'd say that not trusting karma strongly enough. But also here, Khenpo Kumpan says that it's also due to laziness, which means that we're not that enthused about virtue. We procrastinate. We either look down on ourselves, think that, for example, I'm such a bad person, there's no way that I can eliminate my negativities, I'm too stupid, and so forth. Looking down on ourselves is also a type of laziness. Also, we're so attracted to ignoble activities, which is another type of laziness, right? So we like watching YouTube clips. I like to watch YouTube clips, Netflix or whatever, there are those things that come in between, that's what, like watching swimming. So there are things that come in between that, again, erodes our ability to apply an antidote to negative actions. So first and foremost, Khenpo Kumpan's look at Shantideva's presentation. It says that this is what we need to deal with: laziness, distraction, lack of trust in karma, or not understanding karma. What we need to do is to think of karma and death and impermanence, which is, it seems, of what Shantideva emphasizes here. And then it says, next. Yeah.
I've got such a short memory. And, I've been to read, and the thing is that, we come into this life, we have no recollection of what's happened in the past. We're just sort of told this. And even the hell realms and everything like that, I must admit, in recent days, I've been feeling a bit more fearful about my state. Especially when Elsa said, these are degenerative times, we'll be lucky we can find the conditions to be reborn. I mean, we're all going to be competing against each other, for that reason. But, we just don't really have the heartfelt awareness because of our lack of memory. If I could remember the hell realms and stuff like that, I think that would make me a bit more determined than what I am, but we've got no recollection of any of that.
Sometimes when I think about it, I agree with you. I think that you can look at that from the flip side of it. If we had recollections of hell realms, we would be living in a post-traumatic syndrome continuously. Imagine how it would be like to be aware of all your past hellish state of existence and how you were tormented as not only as hell being, but as a preta. What was your state like in being an animal when you're being completely torn apart to shreds by a pack of wild dogs or whatever? I mean, thankfully, we don't have those memories. You know, it would be, when you think of people that have post-traumatic syndrome, for example, I think that, you know, someone has experienced a situation that is horrible. And I would also say that many, you know, it is very likely that, I think that it happens a lot that someone had a wonderful life, but there was this really traumatic event, one traumatic event in their life that completely screws them up. You know, they have this repeated post-traumatic syndrome.
One time.
Yeah, one time. You know, so this post-traumatic syndrome completely overrides all the wonderful experiences that they had in their life. You know, they live a miserable life because of that trauma. So imagine how it would be like if we were to remember all of our horrible past lifetimes. I mean, I would kind of, in some sense, I think that it would be helpful to gain complete conviction that I don't want to be here. But when you look at it from a different perspective, it could also be, in some sense, debilitating.
I mean, you know, and I guess you would then spend a lot of time on remedying that. You know,
or paying a shrink. Or paying a shrink.
I think you have to pay a shrink before you can remedy it,
Yeah.
because you're so overwhelmed by the PTSD.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there is Star Trek and that female character that has a symbiote that she carries, that she has the memories of the last 5 bodies that this symbiote has gone physically from life to life. And in Star Trek, it's very beneficial.
It's very what?
Beneficial.
Beneficial, yeah.
It's very beneficial because it has the wisdom of, you know, past experiences and what's happened in past times. But yeah.
So then let's look at the next section in the commentary. Once they have developed this mindset and applied it, which means to purify negativities, whatever virtue they may practice functions as the preparatory part, the motivation to practice in order to confess one's negative deeds. At the time of the main part, this mindset is earnestly remembering to confess one's wicked deeds. I like this, wicked deeds. And at the conclusion part of this mindset is dedicating one's merit in order to purify one's negative deeds. Thus, if the preparatory part, the main part, and the concluding part are complete, everything serves as a confession of one's negative deeds and therefore as an antidote. So here it says that if you have this mindset, which means that you think of karma, you think of death and impermanence, you think that therefore I have to confess all my negative actions. And here it's not just confession. In English, we say confession. In the way that Tibetan language expresses that is to lay them down. So you disclose them, but also you decide to lay them down, right? So you confess, you purify them and so forth. So if you have this mindset of karma, death and impermanence, you become determined to lay down your negativities. You confess them.
Why that lay them down?
But isn't that the power,
You desist from doing them.
which is the power of restraint?
Yeah. Yeah, so it seems that altogether the third part, the power of antidote, includes, it's all 4. But then you can also say, if, for example, this is the way that I look at it. If you, for example, you've taken something that was not given to you, that's a negative action. To purify that, I think that within the power of the antidote, you want to do something that is opposite to that. So you could be generous. You can meditate on generosity, not just give something, but you can be generate the intention to give. Meditate on Tonglen, for example, or get involved in practices of animal liberation, which is protecting others from fear. You can, if you're in a capacity to do something, you can also share the Dharma with others. This is also part of giving. So in that sense, you think, I've done negative actions before, such as, for example, stealing. I'm totally committed to purify this negativity. In order to enact the antidote to stealing, I should practice the virtue of avoiding from stealing. But also, on top of that, I will create other habits that will counteract that, the habits of giving, for example. That's one thing that you can do. It's not that that's the only thing that you can do, but that's, for example, a way that you approach the power of antidote. So remember that antidote is antidoting the things that you've done before. So you can do it in a specific way, addressing specific negative actions that you've done before, or you can do that in general for all the negative actions that you've done before. So then it says, furthermore, although one might have practiced virtue for an entire lifetime in solitude, unless one confesses with such an antidote, when even a tiny misdeed occurs, one will have to experience its ripening. For instance, there is a single pea. If there is a single pea amongst many barley grains, if one plants the pea together with the barley grains in the soil, though much barley will grow, this pea will also grow. And it will grow without being harmed by the great amount of barley. In the same way, it is said that even though one has, for the most part, practiced virtue, without focusing on the antidote for one's negative deeds, the virtue alone will not annihilate one's negative deeds. So, to that, I also wanted to add briefly what Lama Tsongkhapa said in the Lamrim Chenmo with respect to the power of thorough application of the antidote. So let's look at that. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? I don't know. All right, so in the first volume of the Lamrim, there is a section of, there's a chapter on cultivating ethical behavior. That's in the first volume. So in cultivating ethical behavior, we have an explanation of the power of applying the 4 powers of the antidote. And the second power that Shantideva mentions is the power of applying remedies. And it says, the section has 6 parts. So rather than explaining what Shantideva says, it says, this is what you can do. Now, it says this is what you can do in drawing from another one of Shantideva's texts, which is called Compendium of Trainings. So in the Compendium of Trainings, Shantideva gave suggestions for what kind of practices and meditations you can do in order to purify your negativity. So it says, you can do that in dependence on the profound sutras, which includes such activities as receiving oral transmissions of sutras such as the Prajnaparamita, retaining the meaning and reading them, which means sutra recitation, thinking of the meaning, and also memorizing the sutras is an antidote to things that you've done before. Second one is interest in emptiness, means to comprehend the reality in which there is no self, which is luminous, clear, and to have conviction that the mind is primordially pure. This is actually something that you can consider to be the main power of purification. If you study emptiness, you contemplate emptiness, and you meditate on emptiness, and of course you need to do it in the correct way, that would be the best antidote to negative deeds done before, because all the negative deeds are based on ignorance. And what counteracts ignorance is a meditation on emptiness. So of the different antidotes, it is often said that meditation of emptiness is the best that you can enact, because that would be the thing that will uproot negativities. Then on top of that, Lama Tsongkhapa mentions dependence on recitation, means to recite, according to rituals, the special formula or formulae, such as the 100-syllable mantra of Bodhisattva. Now this formula or formulae that is mentioned here is what we call dharani. Right, so dharani are certain formula, certain, you can say, formulas or patterns, certain recitation that we do, such as the 100-syllable mantra of Bodhisattva. Then the next thing that Shantideva suggests is dependence upon images. It is to make images of the Buddhas once you have acquired faith in him, and then dependence on worship. Means to make a variety of offerings to an image of the Buddha or to a stupa. Dependence on names, that's another thing that Shantideva mentions. Dependence on names means to hear the recitation of and retain the names of Buddhas and the great conqueror's children, which is part of this is one part of the 35 confessional Buddhas. So This is not an exhaustive list of antidotes that you can develop. We also have meditation on the mind of enlightenment, love, compassion, patience, and so forth, renunciation. All of them can serve as antidotes.
And I guess, you know, as you're saying, going through all this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we spend so much time doing all of this, you know, the Guru Purju, our daily practices, our commitments, all of this, you know, all of it.
Yeah. All of it is done. And if we do it skillfully, we can actually, if we have the right motivation, we can think that I've done negative actions before. I'm going to use all these practices in order to confess and lay down my negativities, or to distance myself from those negativities. And at the end, I will also make that commitment not to do them again, and I will rejoice in purifying them.
And that's the point. That normally we are encouraged, normally, you know, we hope to always motivate with the mighty element. And we dedicate. We should have a little appendage there. And also to purify all my negativities. And
there you go.
Because we often don't do that. Well, I don't myself. I don't think of that when I'm doing these things. I think of it more in a positive way, you know.
Yeah, I think that kind of, you know, I think that it's a good comment that you make, like, you know, that we don't do it usually. I also don't do that usually, like that thing that I'm going to use this practice in order to purify negativity. So I think that the benefit of studying texts like that and looking at different commentaries is again to visit our spiritual practice and think of how can I use that text, which I'm looking at for the 4th time, 5th time, and so forth, to improve my practice. So it's not that, when I look at a text like that, it's not that I think that I've already studied it, so what's the point of doing it again? It's actually each time it can contribute to my own personal practice and also add something to it or look at it from another perspective.
And just to add to that, I mean, that's where I think the 7-minute prayer, if you have that in your practices every day, I mean, that covers doesn't.
And therefore I think that sometimes it's good, at least my approach is to not take up 2 commitments. You know, if you have too many recitations a day, too many commitments, you end up just reading through your recitation and think that I just need to have 2 or 3 hours of recitations to do, and I don't have a lot of time to meditate on them, you know. So I think that if you want to do like a really thorough practice of, you know, purification and so forth, it's best at least to start with having less commitments, less things to recite, and try to think about our practices better. So I just wanted also to leave enough time for Jane's question. I'm wondering about skillful means. We're referring often to Buddhas or Bodhisattvas applying skillful means to help sentient beings along the path to enlightenment. How would we as baby Bodhisattvas apply skillful means? I totally agree with you, Jane. You know, it is said that the reason that we want to become Buddhas is to attain that omniscient consciousness that knows the disposition of all sentient beings. You know, so if we knew the dispositions of all sentient beings, we would be totally skillful and direct in being of benefit to them. So currently we don't have it, obviously, but we learn, you know, we train. So our current capacity is quite limited, but I think that the more you train your mind, the more wisdom you develop, the less affected you are by afflictive states of mind. And hopefully, if you spend a lot of time in developing loving kindness and compassion, you find ways that you can affect others without, you know, with trying to be genuinely skillful in your application. So it's something that I think you acquire along the way. You know, so when I think of some of the teachers that I've worked with or that I've seen, or, you know, those that I rely upon, when I look at their skillful means, sometimes I think that it's, you know, I don't have the skillful means that they have, but I learn. You know, I've worked for quite a few years with Geshe Jamang, I've learned from him, some skillful means. I work with other teachers. I learn from them skillful means. So we are limited at the moment, but I think that this is part of our training to learn how to be more skillful. Anyone has anything else to add?
I think what you were saying about learning from the teachers is that one is by observation of what they do, but then sometimes also getting the explanation, just like how much you're accumulating by just inviting people to sit, by using certain gestures, everything becomes meaningful. Yeah, everything becomes meaningful. One thing that kind of I find particularly personal for me is that sometimes I get totally overwhelmed by people's problems and suffering. They come up with questions of something that really bothers their mind, something that completely inhibits their great suffering. And I find that I just have nothing to say, I have nothing to say. I don't know where to start in that sense. But then sometimes being skillful is just to listen to them. Even if you don't have anything that you can contribute, treating them with a sense of affection, with a sense of concern, with a sense of compassion, sometimes it's enough. So, I've seen, I started to notice that when I look at, for example, Lama Zopa Rinpoche or other teachers that I've worked with, sometimes kind of people come up with questions about traumas that they had before, or situations in life that are really difficult. And particularly when you think of relationships and your parents, abusing you, someone else is abusing you. When you think of people like Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Ling Rinpoche and others, they haven't experienced those situations. From young age, they were trained in the monastery. They didn't have like an ordinary relationship. And yet people come to them and ask questions about family life, trauma in family life, and so forth. I think that one of the qualities that they have is just listening to people with a great sense of concern, with a great sense of affection, which is another way of being very skillful in a way that you deal with others. So it's another lesson of skillful means. It's not only about saying the right thing at the right time, but also how you can relate to others with a sense of affection, with a sense of concern. So Jenny is saying, so should we try that? And also we will fail. Otherwise, you have to wait for another action until you're a Buddha. For any action, you have to wait for any action until you're a Buddha. I think that, you try. I think that not only you try to be of benefit to others, you will fail. We will fail in certain situations because we're not omniscient. But we improve. We learn from our experience. We learn what works for many. But along the way, you also come across people that you try to help them, but you don't have the skills to do it. I remember that many years ago, someone came to see Geshe Jamin, and her son committed suicide a few years before. And she came to, she wasn't Buddhist, but someone said, hey, if you see a Buddhist monk, they will definitely be able to help you. So she came to see Geshe Jamin, and he gave her a few advice, things that she could think of. And she was not actually into thinking or doing any of the things that he said. She was just totally overwhelmed by her own suffering. She wasn't in a mind space of actually listening to the advice. So at some point, Geshe Jamin, who didn't understand English at the time, said that, look, I have nothing else to say. I cannot help you anymore. If you cannot think about what I say, we have nothing to talk about. So in that situation, maybe you won't be able to help someone. Maybe the only way that you can help them is just holding their hands. And also, so as I said, we will fail, but we try. We find different ways. Along the way, we will hopefully make progress. Was there anything else that? I was just going to say that actually, as long as you have the motivation of wishing to help, then you haven't failed. That you have the motivation, and little by little, still will come or whatever. But the motivation's in the right place. The practice of generosity is the wish to give.
Yeah.
Like the genuine wish to give.
It's also about holding a safe space for them to be able to discuss what they need to discuss, and taking yourself out of the situation, and just letting them talk and listen, and not holding a safe space for them to be able to express what they need to.
Holding a safe space from them, allowing them to express whatever they need to express without intervening or taking over and so forth. Yeah.
Yaki, can I say too, having had teenagers, they get to a certain age, just like us adults, and it is just about listening, because my kids would even say to me, Mum, I don't want your advice. I just want you to listen, you know?
Yeah.
And you got to remind me sometimes, but it's so true. And everybody's so different. It's not like one thing fits one person and it's not going to fit the next person. So it's just having that space of, you know, I'm not here to fix you, you know, it's just being there, like you said. And then if something comes up you've got to offer, you can offer it without being forced, sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that ultimately we are there to fix them, but currently, you know, it might be that we don't have the skills yet to do it, or they don't have the skills to listen to it. So we have to, you know, sometimes find the middle ground of just listening to them. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's look at the prayers. Gewalin Yududa Lama Sange Rugune to Achikama Lupa de Salagopa Chancho Sancho Rinpoche Makepana Kegyochi Kepanya Mepa Gone Gondo Pelwa Sho Kundira Wekowe Shinkandi Pendande Wa Maluchuwen Chenresi Wantan Zing Yatsoi Shape Site Bado Tengyochi Tozon Janshin Jangan Gawe Tenzi Yosewe Konzo Dobote Choso Kowe Lemon Tutu Pada Sodoche Kondo Shapesh. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ren Patson.
Thank you very much.
Graham wasn't here today.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Yeah. Graham is here.
Thanks, Godson.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, there he was.
Yeah.